Jim had been a park ranger for many years, and he loved every bit of his job. Walking the same paths day after day might have seemed monotonous to some, but for Jim it was a chance to observe the incredible beauty of nature. He paid close attention to the animals, their behaviors, and even made sure their water sources were sufficient. The scenery might not change much, but Jim never stopped being amazed by the wonders he encountered daily. But today felt different. Something was off. As he strolled past a familiar tree, he noticed the large nest nestled in its branches. It was one he'd walked by almost every day for the past few years, a nest he had watched grow over time. He even remembered the first day it appeared, marveling at how the birds carefully added twigs and leaves until it became their home. Usually, the cheerful chirping of birds filled the air before he even reached the tree. But today, silence. Sure, he could hear the usual rustling of leaves and distant calls from other birds around the park, but near this particular tree, everything was still. Too still. It was the kind of quiet that didn't sit right with him. As Jim drew closer, he noticed something even stranger. There wasn't a single bird in sight. Normally, he could spot a few hopping around the nest or perched on nearby branches. On slower days, he'd sometimes linger just to watch them work, bringing back twigs and building their home higher and stronger. But now, the nest looked abandoned. No movement, no sound. Jim approached cautiously. He didn't want to startle the birds if they were hiding inside. The nest appeared intact, with no obvious signs of damage. Maybe there was a simple explanation for all this. Perhaps the birds had gone out searching for food, or maybe they were resting somewhere else. Still, Jim couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. He decided to wait. He wouldn't disturb the nest today. If the birds didn't return by tomorrow, he'd come back and investigate further. For now, all he could do was hope that everything was okay. The entire day, Jim couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He told himself over and over that when he returned to the park the next day, the birds would be chirping, and everything would be back to normal. He wanted to believe that so badly. But deep down, he knew that wasn't going to happen. In fact, things were about to get much worse. Eventually, he would have to call the police. But let's not jump ahead just yet. The next morning, Jim arrived at the park earlier than usual. The uneasy feeling had been with him all night, and he couldn't wait any longer to check on the nest. Walking quickly through the familiar trails, he made a beeline for the tree. As soon as he caught sight of it, a cold wave of dread swept over him. Something was definitely wrong. But Jim reminded himself not to jump to conclusions. Let's stay calm, he thought. As he moved closer, he noticed something strange. Unusual marks in the dirt surrounding the tree. Kneeling down, he examined them closely. These markings weren't familiar at all. They didn't match any tracks left by the animals he knew lived in the park. His mind began to race. Could it be a predator? He wondered. The idea sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't unheard of for dangerous animals to wander into the area, though it was rare. For a moment, his thoughts spiraled into worry, imagining all the potential threats that could have found their way into the park. But after carefully inspecting the area, he noticed something that eased his immediate fears. There were no feathers, no blood, and no sign of a struggle. Whatever had happened, it didn't appear that the birds had been attacked. Still, the nest was too high up for him to see inside, and he knew he needed to get a closer look to figure out what was going on. Jim headed back to the ranger station and gathered the tools he'd need. Normally, he preferred to travel the park on foot, but this time, the urgency of the situation called for the truck. Driving straight to the tree, he quickly unloaded a ladder and positioned it securely against the trunk. With his heart pounding in his chest, he prepared to climb up and finally take a look inside the nest. The ladder shook beneath Jim as he climbed higher, but his determination to see inside the nest kept him steady. Normally, the clatter of the ladder would have sent the birds flying out in a flurry of wings, startled by the noise. But this time, not a single bird emerged. This only deepened his suspicion that something was terribly wrong. As he climbed closer to the nest, Jim's thoughts raced. He was convinced the nest would be empty, but he needed to see for himself to be sure. He had brought tools to cut through the thick layers of the nest, knowing that a clear view inside wouldn't be possible otherwise. Finally, as he reached a height where he could get a good look, he froze. His eyes widened in disbelief. "What? How is this possible?" he gasped aloud, nearly losing his balance on the ladder. The shock of what he saw was almost too much to process. Before we continue with the story, we'd like to take a moment to ask you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means so much to us and helps us bring you more captivating stories just like this one. Thank you. Now, back to the story. Jim stared at the nest, his hands gripping the ladder tightly. The nest, which was normally thick and secure, had a large hole in its side. This wasn't something the birds could have done themselves. He was sure of that. The real question was, who or what had caused it? Through the hole, Jim could finally see inside, and what he found confirmed his worst fears. The birds were gone, but the nest wasn't empty. Far from it. Inside was something that should not have been there, something that left Jim's heart pounding with urgency. He immediately climbed down the ladder, his hands trembling, and reached for his phone. There was no doubt in his mind, this was a situation for the police. Puzzled and increasingly concerned, Jim dialed the police. His voice was tense as he explained what he had found. He described the strange emptiness of the nest and the peculiar object he had discovered inside. Surely, this was serious enough to warrant their attention. But the response he got wasn't what he expected. The officer on the other end of the line sounded dismissive. They suggested it was probably just the result of an animal's behavior or some harmless oddity. "It doesn't sound like something we need to investigate," they said. "Keep an eye on it, but don't worry too much." Jim felt frustration bubbling inside him. Standing alone in the quiet park, he couldn't believe how lightly they were taking his concerns. This wasn't ordinary, he knew that for certain. Yet the police had brushed it off as if it were nothing. The mystery of the nest gnawed at him, refusing to let go. Should he just walk away, as the police suggested? Or should he trust his instincts that something truly strange was happening? He didn't wrestle with the decision for long. If the police wouldn't act, then he would. Whatever was going on, it didn't feel right, and Jim knew he couldn't ignore it. Determination replaced his frustration. He was more than just a park ranger now. He was a man on a mission. Returning to the nest, Jim started his investigation. He carefully scanned the ground around the tree, searching for clues that might explain the nest's strange condition. He examined every inch of the area, his trained eye catching details that most might overlook. Something had to be here, he thought, and whatever it was, he was going to find it. Footprints, discarded items, broken branches, anything unusual. Jim knew he had to be thorough and objective. Every detail, no matter how small, could be a vital piece of the puzzle. Armed with a notebook and camera, he meticulously documented the scene, taking notes and snapping photos of anything that caught his attention. His eyes combed the ground around the tree with laser focus. He searched for signs of disturbance, disturbed soil, unusual markings, or anything out of the ordinary that might explain the mystery surrounding the silent nest. As he worked, Jim reached out to his fellow rangers. "Have you noticed anything strange around the big nest lately?" he asked each one. Their answers were frustratingly similar. Nothing out of the ordinary. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. Still, Jim wasn't discouraged. He knew that sometimes the smallest, seemingly insignificant detail could be the key to solving a larger mystery. Expanding his search, Jim approached park visitors. "Have you seen or heard anything odd near the big nest on your walks?" he asked politely. Most shrugged or shook their heads, but a few mentioned hearing strange sounds or noticing odd shadows near the nest. Though the accounts were vague, Jim jotted down every comment. Back in his office, Jim spread out his notes and photographs on the desk. The clues were few and scattered. Reports of unusual sounds, visitors' vague sightings, the unnerving silence of the nest itself. None of it formed a clear picture, but Jim refused to give up. Determined to find answers, Jim decided to revisit the tree. This time, his careful inspection revealed something new, a pattern in the marks near the base of the tree. At first glance, they seemed random, hidden beneath the undergrowth. But as Jim examined them more closely, he realized they weren't natural at all. These marks were deliberate, methodical. A chill ran down his spine as he crouched to study them further. Whatever had caused these markings wasn't something he'd encountered before. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to take shape, but they only raised more questions. What had been near the nest? And why had it left these strange, calculated marks? What could they mean? The strange markings added yet another layer of mystery to the already unsettling situation. As Jim studied the peculiar patterns near the tree, a realization struck him. They weren't caused by animals. No, these marks were deliberate. They bore the telltale signs of human interference. The placement and pattern were too precise to be random. Someone had been here, and their actions were calculated. This discovery shifted the entire nature of Jim's investigation. The silent nest wasn't just a peculiar oddity anymore. It was now the focal point of human involvement. As Jim inspected further, he uncovered more unsettling clues hidden in the surrounding foliage. Large, distinct footprints, far too big to belong to any animal in the park, pressed into the soft earth. Faint but unmistakable tool marks etched into the bark of the tree caught his eye. These weren't random scratches, they were purposeful. Jim's pulse quickened as he carefully documented each footprint, each tool mark. The evidence painted a troubling picture. He thought back to what some visitors had mentioned: strange shadows, eerie sounds. A new memory surfaced, the occasional flicker of lights in the park after hours. He had dismissed it as teenagers playing pranks or campers being careless, but now it all seemed connected. Whoever had been here wasn't just passing through. Their actions were methodical, deliberate. Jim felt the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. This wasn't just about the nest anymore. Something bigger was happening, and he was determined to find out what. But his determination was met with an unexpected twist. Returning to his office, Jim found a note pinned to the door. The words were scrawled hastily but carried a chilling message: "Stop looking where you shouldn't." A chill ran down his spine. Someone had noticed his investigation and wasn't happy about it. For a brief moment, Jim felt the cold grip of fear. Whoever left this note wanted him to back off, and they weren't afraid to issue a threat to make that clear. But fear quickly gave way to resolve. The note only confirmed what he already suspected. He was on the right track. Jim's jaw tightened as he crumpled the note in his hand. If someone thought they could intimidate him into walking away, they were wrong. Whatever was happening in the park, he wasn't about to let it continue unchecked. The stakes were rising, and so was the danger. But Jim had never been one to back down. This was his park, and he was going to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Following a hunch, Jim decided to explore an overgrown path he had previously overlooked. Tucked away in a remote part of the park and obscured by dense foliage, the path seemed almost deliberately hidden. Pushing through the undergrowth, Jim soon found it led to a secluded clearing, completely out of sight from the main trails. It was the perfect place for someone who didn't want to be found. What Jim discovered there was deeply unsettling. Scattered across the clearing were tools that had no place in a nature reserve: cutting equipment, ropes, and various other items that hinted at foul play. More alarming were the empty cages, ranging in size from small to large. The implication was clear. Someone had been trapping animals, and whatever they were doing, it wasn't legitimate. Jim's stomach churned as he documented everything with his camera, snapping photos of the tools, cages, and the disturbed ground around the site. Each picture told a story of illegal activity, possibly wildlife trafficking or something equally sinister. But Jim knew this wasn't enough. He needed to pull the authorities into the investigation. Returning to the ranger station, he carefully pieced together his findings, organizing the evidence to present to the police. He included photos of the tools and cages, his notes on the strange markings and patterns of activity near the nest, and even visitor accounts of unusual shadows and sounds. This time, when Jim called the police, his efforts paid off. The evidence was undeniable, and the officers finally took him seriously. Working together, they devised a plan to investigate the full scope of what was happening in the park. Jim felt a deep sense of relief. His persistence had finally brought reinforcements, and with the authorities on his side, he knew they could uncover the truth. During a joint sting operation, Jim and the police returned to the tree where the mysterious nest had been found. After thoroughly inspecting the nest, they uncovered a shocking discovery hidden within its layers: a cache of rare animal eggs. These eggs didn't belong to any species native to the park. Their presence was illegal and posed a serious threat to the local ecosystem. It all began to make sense. The eggs were a key piece of the puzzle, linking the activities around the nest to an organized wildlife smuggling operation. Jim's heart raced as the implications sank in. The seemingly quiet park he had spent years protecting was now the site of something far more sinister. But with the evidence in hand and the police involved, Jim knew they were finally one step closer to stopping it. The investigation of the eggs led to an astonishing revelation. They were part of a much larger illegal wildlife trafficking network. The smugglers had been using the park as a secret hub, exploiting its secluded beauty to conceal their illicit activities. This operation was more extensive and organized than anyone had imagined, endangering countless rare species in the process. During the sting operation, Jim played a critical role. His deep knowledge of the park's terrain and layout allowed the police to position themselves strategically, ensuring the smugglers had no chance to escape. Jim's understanding of the group's behavior proved invaluable as he guided the team through the most effective ways to approach undetected. For Jim, it was a shift from his usual duties as a park ranger to something far more intense, working undercover alongside law enforcement. The operation was a resounding success. The smugglers were caught red-handed with the rare eggs in their possession. Thanks to Jim's meticulous evidence collection and the police's well-coordinated strategy, the arrests went off without a hitch. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Jim and the police, but for the park itself. The illegal activities that had threatened its ecosystem were finally brought to an end. As the investigation continued, the full scale of the smugglers' operations came to light. What had started with a single nest in the park was revealed to be just one piece of a much larger wildlife smuggling ring. Rare animals and their eggs were being trafficked worldwide, contributing to the endangerment of countless species. Jim's persistence and the collaborative effort between him and the authorities had brought this harmful network to its knees. The smugglers were held accountable, facing the full weight of the law for their crimes. The court proceedings laid bare the severity of their illegal activities, shining a light on the devastating impact of wildlife trafficking. The penalties handed down were fitting for the seriousness of their offenses, sending a clear message about the importance of protecting endangered species. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and have an amazing day. For Jim, this outcome represented more than a personal victory. It was a win for conservation efforts everywhere. The park he had dedicated his life to protecting was finally safe again, and the wildlife that called it home could thrive without fear of exploitation. This story is a powerful reminder of the critical role vigilance and conservation play in safeguarding our planet's biodiversity. Did you enjoy this story? How would you have acted if faced with the same risks and challenges as Jim? And did you know that 200 to 2,000 species go extinct every year due to human activity? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Courage and determination, as Jim showed, often lead to extraordinary outcomes. Thank you so much for watching and being a part of our community.